Hymn number 565, For the Beauty of the Earth.
For the beauty of the earth, for the glory of the skies, for the love which from our birth over and around us lies, Lord of all, to thee we raise this our grateful song of praise. For the joy of human love, brother, sister, parent, child, friends on earth and friend above, pleasures pure and undefiled, Lord of all, to thee we raise this our grateful song of praise. For the gift of thy dear Son, for the hope of heaven at last, for the Spirit's victory won, for the crown when life is past, Lord of all, to thee we raise songs of gratitude and praise.
Amen.
I would like to invite you all to please kneel as we seek the Lord in prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for the many blessings you've given us, for your watch care and your protection over us. We thank you especially this morning for this beautiful day that we have. It reminds us of your love for each one of us as we see the beautiful colors that you've created for us at this time of year. And it gives us reason to show and to share our thankfulness with our fellow church members this morning. And we ask you to please bless those this week that have been picking up the pieces following the fire in Paradise and making plans and trying to decide and determine where they are going next. And may we know how best to support them and how we can assist them at this time and encourage them. And bless too with our members that have some transitions this week. Alice Wells, as she's recovering from some fractures and will be soon transitioning to receive some rehabilitation care. And we think too about the family of Kathy Manley, a longtime member here of this church who has passed away, and bless as the family grieves this loss and moves forward from here and encourage them. And bless our Pastor Jim and Betty as they are with their new grandchild and still not out of the hospital yet, and will soon be going home, and bless them as they are participating in this event in their son's life. And bless each one of our families where they are today. We have members, each one of us, who we wish were more serious about their commitment to you and to things that are important in this life, and we ask that you be with them. Bless also those that have serious illnesses and are not able to function the way that they would like. And bless each one of us and our witness to those around us in our community here. We ask these things in your name. Amen.
Those of you that are here regularly know that this is not an unfamiliar man. Ray Berg is a longtime member and part of this community here, and for those of you that don't know him, he serves currently as our head deacon and does a ton of stuff, and we've recently decided to give him lifetime tenure in that position, so you can congratulate him. But he's had an awesome idea about how we as a community can engage with Scripture and engage with each other a little bit more, and probably many of you have already heard about that, but some of you this will be new for. And so, Ray, we wanted you, again, to just tell us a little bit about the idea, what the plan is, and how we can get involved.
This pulpit's not going to take much more of this. It'll shake apart, I'm sure. As you know, most of you have tried to sign up. I only have 17 more to finish the quarter. I praise the Lord for that. The idea is we're trying to get the church to write a morning devotional, each member write a morning devotional, and then from that we'll send you to a text for the day, a chapter or whatever, so that we all can read the Bible together and we all can get to know a little bit more about our church family. So, like I said, for this first quarter, I only have 17 more. Please help me out. Please help yourself out, and I'll be around. Come sign up. Thank you.
Perfect. So just so you're clear, it's a 100 to 300 word little devotional thought, and you sign up for a passage. Your devotional thought can be connected to that passage, or it can be just something that's on your heart. Find Ray, even if you're not a writer and you think, man, that's not my thing. There are many people that are doing this that think this is not my thing, but I want to be part of this project that Ray started. And if you go to our website, hoodviewchurch.org, there's a link in the top right corner to go to the Bible Experience webpage. And there you can read a couple sample devotionals and learn a bit more about what this project is. And we're just really excited about it. We've got about 50 of these things turned in already, and 50 people that are signed up. They're awesome devotional thoughts, and it's cool to hear a little bit more about people's own personal experience and feel more connected to them. So thanks, Ray. Appreciate it. I wanted to take just a couple minutes. Some of you asked me if I would be willing to do this. I flew down to Paradise this week and had some time down there. I actually flew into Denver and helped deliver a diesel truck from Denver, Colorado out to Paradise to be used to help find housing for people, to help move RVs around and trailers around. And so I was down there for several days this week, and some people asked if I would just give a little bit of an update about that. We showed these pictures last week, but just for those of you that may have missed out on this, this is the Paradise Church prior to the fire, the campfire that just swept through. Had been recently remodeled. It's an 1,100 member church. You know, they had, I think, 700 people that were worshiping in there the weeks before the fire hit. And it was just completely devastated, completely destroyed, burned down. Those are the structures that used to ground the big wood beams that spanned. So that's the beams have completely burned, and just has the grounding structure remaining. As we mentioned last week, the associate pastor, or the new senior pastor of the Paradise Church, has been in Paradise for 3 weeks prior to this happening. He and his family had just moved out, having accepted the position after serving for 6 years as the youth director in Colorado in the Rocky Mountain Conference. And so they moved out, had just moved in, hadn't yet acquired renter's insurance. And when the word of the fire hit, they were trying to get things moved out as fast as they could. And their family, everyone over the age of 10, drove a car down the hill to try to save as many Jeeps as they could. And they had an 11-year-old daughter who was driving and getting a car out, driving through the fire, and just an amazing little girl. Just in case you think that's negligent, I just want to assure you that she's driven more than many people that currently drive on the highways already. She's got thousands of hours behind the wheel. That's part of being included in their family. They got confirmation that their house had burned down, and I'll show you a picture of it in just a second. This is a video I shot while we were driving through Paradise. They haven't reopened the town for people to be there yet. They still have people that are trying to identify remains and cut down trees that are in danger of falling. They're working to restore electrical, to clean up the electrical mess that's up there. So it'll probably be another week and a half or 2 weeks before people are able to get back up and actually take a look at their homes. We had a friend that's a battalion chief with CAL FIRE that's worked CAL FIRE for 15 or 20 years, and so he clearanced us to get us in there past the National Guard that's set up with their Humvees, keeping people out. And I expected the fire to be really devastating when we went up on the hill, but the thing that shocked me was how widespread it was. We just drove, and for mile after mile after mile, you look over and you see chimneys sticking up where a house used to be. Occasionally there's a house that's still standing, but when people say, hey, what part of the town burned? It's the town that burned. Maybe 20, if I just had to estimate off the areas we were in, I'd say maybe 15 to 20% of businesses were still standing, and maybe 5 to 10% of the houses in the areas that I was in were still remaining. Just absolute devastation. Scenes like this all over the place. This is the senior pastor and our friend who works CAL FIRE. We're at the site of the associate pastor at their home, and they asked us to go in and recover the headstone of her parents. So the associate pastor's spouse, they just had gotten a headstone out of marble cut in order to put it at the grave spot of her parents. And so she directed us to where it was, and we dug through, the rubble in order to find this granite headstone, and the fire had been so hot that when we picked it up, it broke in half and broke into multiple pieces. Just devastating loss. This video is on the corner as we're driving up to the senior pastor's house, to his residence. It's across the street from what used to be a school. This is Senior Pastor Steve Hamilton in the black shirt, and our friend standing in his garage. That car that's on the ground used to have 42-inch tires on it. It had, for those of you that are into Jeeps that would care, it had 17-inch Walker Evans aluminum beadlocks. I know, Michael, you'll appreciate that. We were able to recover one of the wheels. It was a puddle of aluminum that had melted on the concrete. And we picked it up, it was about that thick. All 4 wheels just completely incinerated. The front steering was made out of 250 wall tubing, for those of you that are into Jeeps. And when I looked at it, it was smiling because the heat had heated it up enough that the weight of the metal actually caused it to sag about 3 inches. So this is just an amazing loss. Just to let you know what kind of people these are, when the senior pastor's wife, Delinda, who's been here for 3 weeks, found out that her house burned down and they didn't have insurance for it, her reaction was, I'm so glad. Because how could we have ministered to these people if our house was still standing? They've just hit the ground running, and currently they're set up at the Chico Seventh-day Adventist Church. And in the first 56 hours, they processed 3 gymnasiums full of donations for clothing. And that rolled in, so they filled up the gym, cleared it out, rolled in, they filled up the gym and cleared it out, and they stopped processing donations. They're extremely grateful for them, but at this point they've had more donations rolling into the town of Chico to help these people than can be used, and so they really appreciate it, but at this time people don't have homes, so they don't have anywhere to put the donations that are coming in, and so they've since moved on now and are working to find temporary housing for people that need it. There are about 4, there are several shelters that have been set up in the area, and the people are just really dealing with it. They've lost their homes, and they've had an outbreak of the norovirus going around in the different temporary camps that have set up. If you drive by the Walmart there's probably 100 people that are living in tents and RVs with piles of donations there, and it's just really a traumatic thing. So currently what the Paradise Church is doing is creating temporary housing situations for people, and so they've, last I heard, had about 50 trailers and RVs that were being made available and rolling into the area, and they're finding lots. Chuck here even has offered up his lot, and we're just stashing a couple motorhomes here, a couple motorhomes here, and the Hoodview Church has contributed. We took up an offering, and we were able to buy several generators so that people that are living in these motorhomes can have heat and electricity, because as you can imagine, there's a premium for places that have hookups, and so they're just putting trailers wherever they can find places, and so they need generators to run and bladders for the RVs. At this point, they've been just amazingly overwhelmed by the amount of support they've received, and the best way to continue supporting remains giving. They're not able to process goods at this point. The best thing we can do to support them is to give financially at this point. And so thank you for doing that. They just had, the Paradise Church and Hospital Community just had a town hall meeting on last night, and a worship service together where people gathered together and just talked about and prayed about what this means going forward. Many people have lost loved ones, and that will continue to be the case as the crews sort through the rubble, and there are hundreds of people that are looking for remains and processing that and doing DNA testing so that loved ones can have confirmation and really begin to grieve and process this situation. So it's just a traumatic event, but the thing that stood out to me, a couple things that stood out to me in my experience being there, driving around, my mind turned to the descriptions of what the earth will look like at Jesus' second coming. Millions and millions and billions of dollars of destruction and waste and burning. And I looked around and I thought, everything that we work for and that we accumulate is going to turn into this one day. So it was a reminder to me to make sure that we invest first and foremost in our priorities, are investing in things that can't catch on fire. Invest in things that are eternal. So that was an encouragement, it was a good reminder for me. The second thing that struck me was that if you've been part of the Seventh-day Adventist community, you know that we've been having family conversations across the world scope, and people have been feeling alienated, and there's been some hurt feelings, and we've been moving forward through that. And this reminded me that no matter where you fall on any of those issues, we're part of a family. And what a blessing it was to see when something happens like this, that people jumped in, and the gut reaction was, I want to do something to help. I want to do something to contribute. How can I get involved? And I was just overwhelmed to see that this is a family, this is a community that loves each other. And I just praise God that people like you, people throughout the world, have said, I want to be part of rebuilding this community and giving hope to people. The Pacific Union College Church voted to allocate $60,000 to the Paradise Church to be used directly in the aftermath of this tragedy to try to help out the community. And a lot of that money will go toward helping to fund funerals for people that are unable to pay for that. What a beautiful gesture of a community of people that said, we want to contribute so that people can find healing and hope in the midst of this tragedy. So I want to encourage you to continue giving, to continue praying, and there's good hope there, there's strong courage, and people are confident that God has been with them and will continue to be with them, even though this is difficult. So continue to lift up Steve and Delinda Hamilton, the senior pastor, and his wife as they're leading through this. And thank you for supporting in prayer. I want to transition a little bit. Oh, this is the pile of generators that you helped to acquire. And people are going to have a better Thanksgiving because of you. So thank you. Today we're really privileged to have John Griffin, Dr. John Griffin, leading out in our message today. And for those of you that haven't been with us for the last little while, we've been going through a series that we're calling Thrive. And we're talking about how we can experience ancient wisdom that promotes a happier life. And so we've been on a journey meeting in people's homes, and our messages here on Sabbath. We've had church members that are sharing their experience and what God's been laying on their hearts. And it's been really an exciting journey for me to be able to be involved with, and I'm so thankful for the community that's developing. The last topic that we planned to be sharing about was the topic of community. And as soon as we settled on that months ago when we were planning this, I said, I want John Griffin to be the one that presents for this. Because to me, he's someone, and then there are tons of people like him in this room, but he's someone who gets it when it comes to community. He's someone that's chosen to be a part, to invest in other people, and to look for ways to build and grow and strengthen community. And so just after we do our power word here in a second, which for today is community, we'll invite him up here. But first, we need to do a drawing and get a power word winner. Ellie, would you like to come claim your prize? Man, give her a hand for consistency. All right, boys and girls, our power word for today is community. So go ahead and write that down on your blue card and your name. Keep track of how many times you hear the word community from now on. And then at the end, you can turn it in, and you can win a prize next week. Okay? John, why don't you come up and share what God's laid on your heart?
Brian. Does that both work? One in each hand. Okay, good. We're away. Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve, did you know that Christmas Eve there was not a single Christian in the whole world? There was no Christian in Africa. There was no Christian in South America. There was no Christian in Boring or Estacada, as far as that goes. There was no Christian anywhere. It was 100% pagan. Everywhere you looked, everybody you ran into were pagans. Worshiped lots of different idols, lots of different things. The gods they worshipped were gods that lived and died and ate and drank, envied and cheated and lied, and in general did whatever they wanted to do. And the people's job, like you and I, was to take care of the gods, contribute, give money, our children, whatever, to the gods. One author says that the chief emotional ingredient lacking in the traditional Roman faith was love. People at that time thought of love as being effeminate, weak. Mercy was unthought of. It was boldness, going forward, valor. Love was the ingredient that was not there. There were a few Jews and a few Zoroastrians. Zoroastria became kind of popular about the time of Daniel. And by this time, by Christmas Eve, it had lost most of its followers. And as a matter of fact, it was the Zoroastrians, the Magi, the wise men, that came on Christmas Eve to see the baby Jesus. There were a few Jews, but they were kind of sprinkled around, and there were just a very few of them in one place. So on Christmas Eve, I would say that the thing that was brought to this world was the word love, care for each other. The world now looks like this. The parts that are even light blue are Christian. You can see that Christianity has kind of spread, hasn't it? Christmas Eve, it was 0, and now it's over 2.1 billion people. You can see that it's mostly, or to a large extent, in South America. Huge, almost all of the people in South America. In Africa, the lower part of Africa is almost all Christian. Of course, Russia, United States, Australia. You can see Christianity has spread everywhere. How? What made the difference? How did it do this in that short of time? Well, some people have suggested several different ways, and I'm going to suggest 4. One of them is through teachers, evangelists, of course, and pastors. But you can imagine at the beginning there weren't many pastors because there weren't many believers at all. And we're told that the evangelists really did not play a very big role. Who's the evangelist you can think of right off the bat? What's St. Paul? Paul was an incredible evangelist. Did you know that when you look carefully at it, Paul was in jail and under arrest a huge part of his life? It's hard to evangelize when you're in jail. So it turns out that he really spent about 3 years as an evangelist. Now, he spent some time right after his conversion out in the desert. He was a ship, at sea, doing lots of different things, but he was only a short time as an evangelist. But part of the time he spent teaching. But some of them became obstinate. The evangelist came in, Paul, and the people became obstinate. They refused to believe and publicly maligned the way. The way was, of course, the Christians. So Paul left them. He took the disciples with him and had discussions daily in the lecture hall of Tyrannus. This went on for 2 years, so that all the Jews and Greeks who lived in the province of Asia had heard the word of the Lord. The lecture hall of Tyrannus. You can look up on the internet and see pictures of the lecture hall of Tyrannus. I mean, talking about the remains. And Dick and Brenda, Dick has written, and on the internet you can see it, very, very discussion about the Hall of Tyrannus. It was an educational institution, a very well thought of educational institution. They had classes in the morning. And so in the afternoon, Paul would come over and he would teach in those halls. And it says he was very successful. It says, all the Jews and Greeks who lived in the province of Asia heard the word of the Lord. He must have been very successful. And certainly Hoodview is probably one of the best outreaches that we have as a church here now. It's an incredible blessing. It's been an incredible blessing to me. Been able to educate my children there. It's been a big help. So that's one way. It was through teachers and pastors. But it appears really, when carefully looked at, that was a very small part of it. What was the second way? Well, it was spread by women. At that time, women were not very, the population was made up of 2/3 men and 1/3 women. There were very few women. Well, why was that? Well, folks, they didn't have antibiotics in those days. Didn't really have a way to stop bleeding. Surgery was not done very commonly. So when women had babies, which they did have babies, frequently they were lost, they died. Abortions were very common in that day. Many women had many abortions. Abortion is not something that can be done without some hazard of infection, so that many of them died by infection. Among the pagan women, among the pagan families, women were, baby girls were not well thought of, so they were left out to die and not cared for, sort of like in some countries now. Pagan girls were frequently married off at 12 or 13 years of age. If they became pregnant, obviously, they were not mature enough yet to carry a child. And so there were not very many women overall. But there were a lot of Christian women in the Christian church. They came there because they were treated equally. A man and a woman were no different. They were leaders in many cases and within the church. In fact, in some of the churches were mostly women. They married later in life, 18 to 20. Some of us don't think of that as being late. They were more mature. They lived by their standards, and so abortions were very rare, if at all. So they survived on the basis of that. They had more children. They took care of their children. They kept all of the children, boys or girls. So in general, they had about 25% more children alive at the end. Another interesting thing was that since there were so few women in the population in general, Christian women were in abundance, and there weren't enough Christian men to marry the Christian women, so that pagan men figured out this would be a fine wife. She was honest, caring, loving, faithful. Those are all things that men look for. And so many of the men, the pagan men, became converted because they married Christian women. So that's been something that our community's done a little bit of here. It brought people into our church through marriage. Besides that, it was a very loving community. And they welcomed everybody. Anybody that would come, they would welcome them. That included slaves, people of all different nationalities, people that were alcoholics, people that were everything under the sun. When they came, they were welcomed. They were loved and cared for. And so that made a very community that was open and helpful. And fourth, they cared for the sick. To get a little sense of what it was like in Rome at this time, homes were over there, what was that, a couple months ago? A year ago? And they showed us pictures. You know what, you could hardly walk between the buildings. There's these huge marble buildings just everywhere. Well, they say back at this time, when Christianity started, there would be one big building like that every 4 or 5 blocks, because the people all lived in wooden structures built up to 6 stories high. And they did not really have what you would call good engineering necessarily of these wooden structures. They were kind of put up and so that they frequently fall and catch on fire. The rich lived on the bottom floor, the poor lived on the top floor. And, do I need to tell you they didn't have elevators? Well, as far as that goes, they didn't have windows either. Or bathrooms. Well, really running water, or a sink, or a stove. And sometimes there were 3 or 4 families living in the same room. The number of people that lived in an area roughly the size of our church property here was maybe about 300 people be permanent residents of this kind of an area. More congested than is in any of Calcutta or any of the cities that we normally think of. So when illness swept through, and they did, just like influenza is coming, in a few months, we know it'll come. But in those times when it came through, it would kill everybody. They were all jammed together there, and so that this catching illnesses from other people was just everywhere. And you can see when you're running a high fever, if you've had the flu, you run a high fever, 104, 105, 103. You need water. Well, what do you do to get water? Well, what you do is you go over and you grab a pot, you go down 6 floors, you walk to the river, fill the pot up, carry the heavy pot back to the house and up the 6 floors. What do you think people would do when they had, smallpox or chickenpox? They died. And they died because of lack of water, lack of food, lack of care of any kind. And so whole cities would be wiped out. And so people were frightened by this. When they see a plague coming, to get out of town, they'd run. But if you were sick, you couldn't run. And so sometimes people were left right where they died, right where they were, in the streets everywhere. The bodies were just left there. But since Christians were told and believed that we take care of the women, widows, we take care of the sick and the aliens, they then would stay there and help care for the sick people. Well, you know what would happen if people got water and food and somebody cared for them? About a third of them would live. And so in a city where maybe 1,000 people died, if there were 50 or 100 of them that were alive that were Christian, you can see that soon, after a few years of this, became a high percentage of the population. And so that was another way that Christianity went forward. It was caring for the sick. Another way that Christianity went forward was, you might say, in a hypothetical situation, and this is hypothetical, but let's just say that Jim, let's call him Jim McMurray. Well, let's just call him Jim. One night he's looking around for friends, and he thought, man, I'd like to have a friend. And so what he did is he got to thinking, Brian is a friend of mine. I'd like to make him a friend. And so he would reach out to Brian. And Brian, being a friendly sort of guy, would then reach out a little later on to Chantel. And then Chantel would reach out. I mean, the two of them would kind of enjoy each other's company. Then pretty soon, a little one would come along. We see, shall we call this one Jonathan? What do you think? Or Judah? Anyway, let's say they have 4 sons. This is hypothetical. And so you can see that what has happened is that Jim, without as much effort as you'd think, has brought me, what is that, 6 people into the church. Well, let's just push this just a little bit further. Let's say that now those 4 sons are like Brian. They're looking for 4 young women. And so the 4 young women and the 4 sons then make 4. And so what are we at? So how many is that? That's 24. 4 times 6 is 24. And so you can see what happened is Jim has brought in, well, there were 2 to start with, so that means he's brought in 26 people. And so you can see that after a short time, Jim's friends would take up a huge section of our church. And I would say this is the way the church would go forward. Now, I can hear Chuck saying to Janet over here, Griffin, you're gone completely off the rail. He said, Janet and I really had no plans on having more children, and we're not alone. We have others here. Kreitzes are also not planning on, I'm not trying to prophesy anything. I'm just saying, let's say that they don't. Well, that's the same situation they had back in that time, too. They didn't all just have children. Some of them were single people. Some of them were slaves. Some of them would never marry. And they came into the family of the community. But there were also people that came in that had children already. Like 8 or 10 people in the family, including servants and different kinds of people. So this is the way, another way, that the church grew. More and more people became part of it by just reaching out to various people from just family and relationships. One of the things that they did that I think is really important, and that is that they decided that you do not expose them to doctrine first. It is to expose them to the most loving community. You're in favor of that? I think that is so critical. People may not really have a huge question about what happens, after after some of the signs that are in Revelation. Some people may not have an idea about some of our doctrines. But you know, if they are loved, they will come. I think that food and companionship are the things that really mean the most. I know that when my wife died, that the companionship and the care, in fact, as this church went further than most, they found another wife for me, so that, I mean, you can't. And I will always be, but I think that that's the way that I think the church can go forward and will go forward. I was at a medical meeting here a while back, not to talk about medicine too much, but one of the things that people are facing, physicians are facing, is incredible burnout. At the present time, as we speak now, 7 or 8 out of 10 physicians that you would go see when you're sick are very unhappy with their job. If you see a surgeon, if it's a woman, it is very likely that she's on antidepressants or under treatment for depression. She is very unhappy. How can we treat that unhappiness? It is something that is being thought about a lot. One of the meetings I was at, one of them was the speakers was from Cleveland Clinic. And he kind of startled me. This is, bear in mind, was in, I think it was in Amsterdam, but I can't remember for sure, one of these towns. And he said, there's one thing that really helps. You should take one day off every week. Do not work on one day every single week. And I thought, when Annette was preaching last Sabbath, I thought, you know, she's ahead of him. That's exactly what our church is about, isn't it? It's a time to rest and be together as friends and enjoy each other's companionship. That's what he said, one day off every week. He said another thing. He said, what you need to do is you need to have a group of people that you have as sort of resources, a community. People that are all different kinds of people, but people that care about you. You know, we're not talking about a whole bunch of doctors. We're talking about just people in general. That was the second thing he thought. I think that we at Hood View here have something that we can tell the world and that we can help our community with. Because it turns out, believe it or not, that it's not just doctors that are burned out. I know I have one of my friends is a banker. And she says banking is really, well, she said banking is, well, it's a bad place. And you know what I found out? Firemen, it's the same thing. And recently it was in noon that policemen are not enjoying life. I think it's just builders are probably the only people that really are having a good time. The point I'm trying to make is that we have something here that we can help the community with, and that is companionship and love and care. There is a Ellen White said this, and I think that's probably the most powerful thing that I saw that she has said. Only by love is love awakened. And folks, that's the only way we can deal with some of these problems. I can tell you right now that narcotic abuse, really chemical abuse, because alcoholism is a huge problem too. You know what they recommend to treat that with? Community. A group of people coming together. That's the only thing that works. You may have even heard of it before. Alcoholics Anonymous, ever heard of that? This is the only thing we've got. It turns out that also treating diabetes and obesity, this is the sort of thing that we need to have, is community, people reaching out to each other. Childhood abuse, PTSD in veterans, really in other people too. This is all we have to offer, and it is the most effective thing. I could go on and on about that, but there's a study called the Harvard Health Study. It's been going on for about 80 years, so this actually was started before I was a practicing physician. And I will say, you see what it says there? Good genes are nice, but joy is better. And you know that's right. This study is really fantastic. There's an Adventist health study. And I know John Gobble thinks that being a vegan is the answer to it. But I happen to think it's the community that makes the difference. It's the love and care for each other. It's the helping us deal with various things. Loneliness kills. It's as powerful as smoking or alcoholism. This is one of the authors in the Harvard Health Study. Here's another one. When the study began, nobody cared about empathy or attachment, but the key to healthy aging is relationships. Relationships. That's good. Michelle, you agree with that? No, I really feel that that's it. Then the question, of course, is how are you going to apply this to this church? And I don't know what to say exactly. I can tell you that I can tell you about a few things that have happened with me. I have, as you know, 5 children. Children have problems. One of my kids got into trouble. He burned the engine out on his car. And called up, he said, "Hey, Dad, what do you think I should do?" I burned the engine out of my car. He said, "You know anybody around there that could take care of it?" And I said, "Well, I'll check around." So I talked to Brian here, and Brian gave me the name of Andy Stevens, Diane's son. And so I called up Andy and said, "Hey, Andy, I understand you repair engines. Is that true?" "Well," he says, "I really don't repair engines." He said, I said, "Well, let me just tell you what I need." I said, "I've got one of my children. He's got a Subaru Outback, and he was trying to go 150 miles an hour, and he got at 157 miles an hour, it blew the engine." That's what happened. And now, it wouldn't be so bad, but that was the second time, and he's telling me that his wife is starting to say, "Look, every time you go out, you'll blow an engine. Maybe we ought to try something different." Or that was something like that, wasn't it? It was said. In any event, Andy said, "You are exactly the right person for me to talk to." He said, "I just today had my Subaru out," and he said, "we made 200 miles an hour in a half mile." Now, it's a half mile from the corner down there to the golf club up here, you know? And so that he was going 200 miles an hour when he got to the corner up there. That's pretty fast, isn't it? It turns out he has 1,300 horsepower in his car. A lot of Subarus don't have 1,300 horsepower. I will tell you that he was of help to me. I had another problem. I have a tree down here. It's about 4 foot in diameter, and it's 120 feet tall, and it died. I don't know whether they have souls that rest in peace, but I tell you, I sure missed that tree. But anyway, it was going to have to come to an end sometime, and my wife kept telling me again and again, it's going to fall and knock down the power lines, and I'll have to pay for the power lines. So I thought, well, I better take the tree down. And so I know probably the most experienced lumberjack in the Northwest, I would say, is sitting right over here, Harold Endenberg. He's 92 now, and I figure he's cut more trees in 92 years than a lot of people have even thought about. So Harold came out. We cleared the entire field because we didn't want any of our cars or anything to be smashed. Harold drove in, and my wife and I both thought, that's exactly where the fool tree is going to land. But he got out of the car. No, he said, it'll be fine. And it was fine. He felled the tree for us. He was within just a matter of a few feet of where he said it was going to fall, which I was good for. And it was kind of a testimony to the neighborhood, too, because a lot of people had come to see what was going to happen when I fell a tree. You know, we have a resources within our very family here, our community. You know, if you need sauerkraut, let me just tell you, the best sauerkraut's made right back here. Mike, would you mind raising your hand so people could see where to get it? Right there. Now, a lot of you people think that he just blows stuff up, but no, he knows how to make sauerkraut. If you want the best Korean food, it's found right over here. Shanae. She makes the very best Korean food in the world. And I can tell you what, you can get it for free right here at the potluck. And it's worth it to come. I mean, you could put up with almost any sermon just to get the good food. The thing that I'm trying to say is that we have resources within us here that we can help each other and care for each other and make this into a family. And I think the secret to it is not to spend a whole lot of time telling each other about the things that we did wrong or do wrong, but about what we can do together. The thing that we share. The joy of Christmas Eve. Had to speak in Estacada this morning, and I asked my wife, I said, what do we know about outreach in Estacada? Nothing. And she says, oh yeah, no, I know some things about Estacada. She said, I go there about 5 days a week. I said, well, man, that's amazing. We have 10 workers that work in Estacada. I mean, they're not 10 all the time, but they're off and on workers that come. And so they're over there. You know, one of them heard that I was preaching, and she showed up at Estacada Church for the first time. One of the ladies on our street here got pregnant. Her husband was out of town, and the front yard got to the place where you could lose a small child and not know it. I don't know whether you know my wife, but she's a fanatic when it comes to mowing. I mean, she'll mow. I mean, I'm so thankful for these friends of mine from Estacada. At least I don't have to mow then. That child is now in Hoodview School. You know, I'm not sure that every time we do something that something good's going to happen. You know, I mean, even the Blazers, when they throw the ball at the basket, don't make one every single time. And I've noticed that when the Blazers take it out, and I'm not a sportsman, you know that, but when they start at the end down there, they throw it to another person, and then that other person frequently throws it to, I mean, so it's a kind of a community effort kind of a thing. And see, that's what I think that we can do here. I think we can reach out to each other, to friends, neighbors, and help guide people to a better life. You know, very few people are unhappy about a better life, living longer. And if we can give them that much, that's worth a lot, you know? If we can give them a safe place to come. Now, a lot of things that we preach, there's not a lot of texts about. Abortion, you know, how many of you read the text about abortion? Well, there aren't any. Homosexual marriage, you know how many texts there are about homosexual marriage in the Bible? None. And we could go on and on about this. Many of the things that we preach and talk about are important doctrines possibly, but they're just not there. But now when you look up love one another, at least on Google, you will get hundreds of texts. I want to throw a few of them up here. And a new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. Now, I think this, and I wasn't, I mean, John, you know, of course, I never knew him. But anyway, he, I suspect, was not talking about just loving the good-looking ones. You know, that early church, I suspect, was made up of a whole lot of really odd people. I mean, really odd people. And I think that's what we're talking about, is loving each one of us. Now, I mean, we've got a collection here. I mean, let's be candid. It's a pretty odd crowd that's here today. Would you agree? I mean, there's some that are not. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, some of you are really. But I think we need to learn to reach out to each other, even the ones that have these really strange doctrines. So he says, whoever claims to love God yet hates his brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God, whom they have not seen. That's the rest of that last text. I can't get used to this. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. Oh man, isn't that wonderful? Covers a multitude of sins. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. And I'll have to admit that I need a few lessons on exactly how to love. But I'm starting to get the drift of it. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. You know what? Somewhere it says in there that if we love one another, that people will be drawn to us. Let no debt remain outstanding, except the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. Did you see that last part? You know, some of these laws are kind of obscure. And I keep worrying, what do you do? And sometimes in ethical things, you wonder, what's the right thing to do? Well, the thing to do is a loving thing. Because that's the thing that's fulfilling the law. And that's what he came here to tell us about. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. Recently I had somebody wanting to study the Bible with me. I thought, well, I should give that to Brian. He's a professional. But after a while I got to thinking, really, there's nothing wrong with us saying, I'm not an authority in this area, but, I'd love to just study with you. We can learn together. We can figure this out. And I've noticed that in my practice, I have patients that come to me, and they'll sit down and they'll talk about what their illness is and what treatment they would like and when they'd like to see me the next time. And, really all I need to do is say, yeah, that's fine, And sometimes they're completely off. And I can tell them that I've been doing this now for, 45 years, and I go to all the meetings. Doesn't cut anything with them. They met a lady at the spa, and she has this same problem, and she says this works, and she'd like to try that. And I could say we could do the same thing with people that we meet. We don't have to act like an expert. We could say, I got that same problem. I got problems with my kids. And what do? Let's study together and figure it out. And I think that by reaching out in that manner to our community, we can bring people in, loving them, caring for them. And I think that's what Christmas Eve was all about. Christ came to show us what love was about.
I invite you to stand with us for the closing hymn, hymn number 350, Blessed Be the Tie That Binds.
Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love, the
Our dear Heavenly Father, the great Creator that made everything, we are so thankful for your gift.